Hello everyone, and welcome back to the channel. I'm your host, War Rabbit, and today we're going to review my favorite game of the year so far, Clair Obscur Expedition 33. This is your one warning. If you haven't played the game, there will be spoilers, so click off if you don't want to see them or hear them. I'd really appreciate it if you hit the like button, if you liked the video. If you want to see more content like this, hit the subscribe button, and if you have anything you'd like to say, drop in the comments section. Anyways, let's begin. Starting off, Clair Obscur is a mix of somewhat novel turn-based action, beautiful visuals, and an amazing soundtrack and pseudo-open world features, tied together with a gripping story that kept me pushing to see what happened next. Although it had all the hallmarks of mediocre bad games from the last 5 years, which were uninspired turn-based combat and an empty open world, the developers of Sandfall Interactive managed to meld those failings of previous AAA slop and created the best rendition of turn-based combat played in recent years. The story behind the developers at Sandfall Interactive is almost as entertaining as Clair Obscur itself. Being the former employees of the AAA gaming studio Ubisoft, they showed that although they left the dying gaming giant, their journey was just beginning. The success of Clair Obscur is as much a statement to the skill and talent of the developers as it is a testament to the bloated decay of AAA gaming giants like Ubisoft that have been spiraling down the gutter of washed-up corporate slop, only to end up selling IPs that have been industry titans for over a decade. The fact this wasn't made under Ubisoft goes to show how rotten AAA gaming has become, and how AAA gaming studios prioritize making slop fit for the DEI pigs they want to court in a vain attempt to get brownie points from Twitter activists and Reddit revolutionaries, instead of prioritizing making games gamers actually want to play. When you first boot up Clair Obscur, you aren't met with corporate scrubbed music with a soulless title screen that you're just trying to speed through to enter a 5-minute loading screen to get a barely finished cutscene with bug textures as you would in more modern titles like AC Shadows or Dragon Age the Veilguard. There isn't some prompt telling you to open a store menu to purchase a microtransaction garbage. No, you boot up the game and you're met with one of the best soundtracks from the game and a minimalist design that complements the entire dreariness of Expedition 33's journey. The title screen sets a tone that the rest of the game maintains and never once deviates from outside of some minor moments of jovialness meant to show the tragedy of the situation, or random zany minigames meant to spice up the gameplay loop and just take you for some fun. Again, there's no real subversion in this game of its tone. It doesn't try to put random millennial humor or zoomer slop into a dark melodrama, and it shows the clarity of purpose the devs were operating under and why the game is so enchanting. It's a masterclass in storytelling, and it's insane that AAA gaming giants are incapable of this, because Marvel movie writing has seeped so heavily into their studios they can't possibly understand that gamers don't want the sanitized gruel that comes out the ass end of the Karenocracy they call HR. I don't want random moments of millennial slop that tears me out of the story. I want to remain immersed in the setting and take it when I'm playing. I don't want to see characters like Tosh from Dragon Age the Veilguard. I want to see Verso and his struggles. I don't want to see Yasuke and his poorly animated homosexual romance. I want to see the emotional roller coaster of Mael's journey. I want a game that is true to itself and not fighting for modern political beliefs that are held by the non-existent modern audience. Let games be games, not poorly veiled political statements that cost $300 million to make. I truly do love this game, and I was surprised to see how well it turned out. But this doesn't mean it doesn't have its issues or any faults. With every positive of this game, it's not without its negative, no matter how minor they are. I was surprised at how well this game ran, especially when I was running on a potato with a 1060 graphics card, and it was staying at 30 FPS the entire time until I upgraded to a 4060. From there, the frame rate stayed constant, which is not something I could say about other titles that came around at the same time, like Doom to Dark Ages with constant crashes and frame drops. I rarely encountered bugs, and I never crashed once, with the only major performance issue being a slight frame rate drop in the overworld at times when you boot it up. The main problem I was having though, and it was really minor to be honest, and it was a random flashbang caused by some sort of lighting bug when entering the open world, and it just turned the entire screen just white. The overworld is, like most open world games, visually stunning, but at times it lacks any real substance. It's just mostly pathing around the area like normal, and then you have the odd in-between fights that take you out of the monotony. You know, the progression of the game is locked by an SKA's abilities, which you get by finishing main story sections, and it opens up the map for more exploration, and it just keeps that gravy train going to the gameplay loop. And once you start running around on the SKA, you start getting access to dungeons that, for the most part, fully fledged exploration zones similar to the open world, but some of them are just places where you pick up a music disc and listen to some music in a kind of zany environment, and individual areas for one-off bosses that have like cool little puzzles to get to, but for the most part it's just nothing. And then when talking about bosses, each boss is relatively unique, with certain ones being even more unique or just being later game enemies like these types of games tend to be. However, unlike games like Elden Ring, where the vast majority of bosses are just duplicates, Clair Obscur managed to keep the game bosses unique with difficult fights, and they're fair for the most part because you're able to interact with them when they do things. One of my main issues with bosses, though, and the combat in general of this game, is that the player character power scaling is just way too high, even on the highest difficulty, even in New Game Plus. You know, towards the end of Act 2, most enemies were dying in a few hits or just individual character turns. And once you unlock certain pictos like the cheater passive or painted power, it just becomes insane how much damage the players can do. And then combat became more of a chore when you're just grinding through everything. It's like, okay, here's the next wave of enemies I gotta take out really quick to get some random garbage or upgrade material that's just gonna give me like a 10% increase to my billion damage, you know? And the worst part of the power scaling is like the ultimate super endgame bosses, like Simon. They're effectively the strongest bosses enemies in the game, and they died in 3 turns or a few turns even. And it's a multi-phase fight, so I'm just sitting there, I shoot one phase, and then the next phase he's down, and then I do another phase, shoot him, he's down, and then do a third, and now it's the over of the fight. And it was a very beautiful fight. It just took maybe 5 minutes. You know, any decently built Verso and Mael could realistically one-shot anything or take it down in multiple small hits that equate to like 1 billion damage. And that's being done in a turn cycle, or even just, and then if that doesn't happen, you use another character with support-focused builds like Monoka or CL, and nothing can really stop you because CL just gives them an extra turn to do all they want, and that's equivalent to 2 turns. So it's just no matter how much health they have, you'll just get them down. The most enjoyable part of this game, combat-wise, is when I didn't have painted power and when I didn't have cheater, because most of the fights took longer than 1 turn. However, the later game enemies have millions of health, while the damage cap was 9,999, which would effectively make the fights take 30 minutes or more to just complete, and then you're not taking any damage that entire time because you have to parry everything or dodge it, otherwise you die instantly because they one-shot you anyways. You know, and even then, after getting the painted power pick, I wouldn't even say that's the biggest power spike of the game. The biggest power spike is when you get CL, because once you figured out how to build her, which took me a while, but once you figure it out, you can get an internal stun lock going where the enemies never get a turn, and especially when you're targeting bosses, like when there's just one enemy to fight, they never get a turn, and you just keep them at the bottom, and there's just nothing they can do. And like even the hardest bosses become jokes when they don't get a turn, you know? But overall, combat's exciting, and the addition of parries and other responsive abilities to enemy attacks set this game apart from other turn-based games in more modern turn-based games like Metaphor Fantasio, and even old turn-based giants like Pokemon. I'm surprised no one other than Sandfall Interactive found such a simple way to spice up the genre, and it works even with its failings and issues. Although Clair Obscur has some minor failings, they are completely inconsequential when you start to bring up what was done well. The music of the game pairs perfectly with the flow of the game's combat and matches the energy and cutscenes to a T. Each character theme is original, and I haven't heard anything like it in years, and maybe even ever in a video game. The novelty of the OST is like hearing the Halo soundtrack for the very first time when you boot up Halo 2, and it's moving and it's iconic. When you start a boss fight or a cutscene, you just sit there in a momentary daze as the orchestral siren song sets the scene for the fight. Game music feels like a lost art when you play modern titles, with how many games either have forgettable soundtracks that make me feel like I'm in an elevator, or I'm permanently trapped in a Walmart with the most sanitized top 500 songs being played on repeat. The sound designers for Clair Obscur crafted the best game music I've heard in years, and sits up there with the great tracks like Mjolnir, Mirks, and Deference for Darkness. Sounding fantastic, and pairing well with the combat of the game isn't the only thing that the soundtrack of Clair Obscur does either. The music matches both the theme of the game and surprisingly the pace as well. It isn't overbearing or harsh, or most tracks stay sorrowful while waxing and waning with the story. Sadness and melancholy are common themes in each song, and it helps paint the picture of what's happening in the game. There are very few upbeat story sections, which means there aren't many joyous songs in the OST. Maintaining the dreadful tone of the setting throughout the whole game and the music in his accomplishment I have not seen other studios do in a long time. Thematic consistency is a core tenet of what makes a great story. You can't jump around from a serious tone to a comedic one in mere seconds like other mediocre slop does. You have to full send it in one direction or just not do it at all. Clair Obscur does exactly this. The entire story revolves around loss and joylessness. The few happy moments are used to show the severity of the task that the expeditioners are facing. They are the last chance for the entirety of their people, or at least one of them, and every major story beat revolves around death or the revelation of something horrible. Nothing that makes you feel good in this game pushes the story forward, and only the pain of grief remains after the end. Each main character keeps their sob stories locked away, and as you as the player have to unlock them by spending time with them. Without fail, all main character backstories lack any happiness. There might be small kernels of light in the dark, but they will be snuffed out by the crushing weight of reality. The actual game starts with the entire expedition being wiped out in seconds, with the survivors barely hanging on, only for the loss of Gustav at the Act 1 to destroy any semblance of hope they had. Act 2 starts with probably the best part of the game, which is Gustav's burial. The devs handled the death of a main character masterfully and showed the respect he deserved even if the moment was short. Each character was broken and only continued because that's all they had left, right? In a meta sense, if this was a AAA gaming studio, the remaining characters would have been emoting on his grave with how horrible modern game writing is. They would have been making fun of him because he was a male character. They would have been shitting on him, but no. Clair Obscur managed to maintain that tone of sadness and actually respected the death of this main character. It was insane how novel it is when you compare these to more modern titles. Act 2 ends with the expedition beating the Paintress and returning with fanfare and jubilee, right? You're all happy, and Amita gets cut short, like all moments of happiness in the game, when it pans over to Verso, who's looking at a letter, and he reveals a major secret he was keeping, and everyone gets gamaged. And then Act 3 just pops up, and there's no time to be confused. You got to keep going. And major story elements are then revealed, with the main antagonist not being the Paintress, but actually being Renoir, right? Act 3 has the finale of each of the characters' backstories, with each one being more horrible than the last. The true finale in Lumiere is the first upbeat moment where the players feel that they can actually win instead of being trapped in defeat. And then the expeditioners challenge Renoir, win, and then the biggest decision in the game occurs. The decision between siding with Verso or Mael is truly heartbreaking. You either allow Verso to finally rest and force Mael to move on, or let Mael wallow in her grief of her brother's death and eventually die in his painting. The emotional shock of choosing between the two is a fantastic end to this game, and again matches the theme perfectly. Both options are valid, both options are depressing. If you pick Verso, the last part of his soul is destroyed, and everyone and everything inside his painting is destroyed. But Alicia can finally move on with the rest of her family. If you pick Mael, she lives out the remainder of her existence in Verso's painting, forcing Verso to live in pain, watching her slowly die, but she can have momentary happiness from the escape of reality. I was appalled at how well this game's story is written, and it puts to shame the entire industry for the garbage they're putting out. How can a small dev team only charge $40 for this masterpiece, while every other AAA game studio continues to pump out shit at $80 price tags? It's a complete disgrace. So, Clair Obscur will always hold a special place in my heart after playing it, and I'm surprised it will. May have been relatively short for these types of grand epic RPG type of games, but realistically never overstayed its welcome, and it's did a much better job than a good chunk of its predecessors. It may not have been a perfect game, but Sandfall Interactive managed to make a game of the generation with such a small team, and I think it rivals even some of the greats of the previous generations, like the Halo trilogy, Gears of War trilogy, God of War, Dark Souls, Metros, and the list can keep going on. This game, in my opinion, will forever be cemented in the highest regards of gamers. It's a true testament that corporate HR disinfected media is not what the average person wants to play. It's not about what check boxes are checked or what group of people is represented. It's about the soul behind the project and the sheer will to make an idea manifest into a masterpiece. And with that, I give Clair Obscur Expedition 33 a 9 out of 10. Again, thank you all very much for watching. This has been my Clair Obscur review. Have a great day.